All right, like I've been doing with everyone else, I'll probably let Jeremy talk a little bit about himself and the program. But this is Jeremy Douse, and he's a Northern Region Forester for the Division of Forestry. He's going to give us an overview of the Forest and Resource Practices Act, the reforestation requirements, and just a program update, I think. So, turn it over.
All right, afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so we're at the last presentation of the day, and we're going to talk about statutes and regulations and administrative code and best management practices. And after Keith's presentation, the state's reforestation program, just temper your expectations. All right, that's all I'm saying. So yeah, Jeremy Douse, I'm the Northern Region Forester for the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection. So we do have Trevor here, who's actually in charge of reforestation. What does Ranger stand for? Reforestation, nurseries, and genetic resources. And then in the division, most of our planting is focused up north. So Kevin Meany, the Fairbanks Delta area forester, and Andrew Allaby are probably the experts in the division, but I used to deal with it as the resource forester, so I'll do my best here. So like all of our regulations, they're all tied to a statute. And this is the statute that the reforestation requirements are tied to. And basically what it says is that if you're going to cut trees, then you have to replace trees. And if you have to do that artificially, then you have to do it with something that's silviculturally appropriate. So that's what that's essentially all that it says. And as a state agency, we've tiered a whole bunch of administrative code off of that. So I think most everybody in this room is aware of FRPA, but if you're not, it stands for the Forest Resources and Practices Act. And there's some intent to it to protect fish habitat, water quality, and then maintain forest as forest. We have 3 regions in the state, and they all have different nuances in terms of best management practices and some regulations. So mostly what I'm talking about today is Region 2 and Region 3, even though Keith got into reforestation on a Fognac, and they have quite a program down there. Mostly we don't have an issue with reforestation in Region 1. Hemlock comes back prolifically, and so there's not as much of an issue as there is in like Region 2 and Region 3. So going even further back on FRPA, FRPA first was created in 1978. Is that right, Ken? Just kidding. So it was created in 1978, but the first riparian management regulations came about in 1981, which I don't know what it was before that, because FRPA really just focuses on fish habitat, water quality, and then reforestation. But the reforestation part of the act kind of came into existence in 1993. And prior to that, we had, as a division, we had a reforestation handbook, and this just moved it into the regulations. That if you're going to cut trees on private land, on municipal land, trust lands, and state land, then you have to reforest it. There's some exemptions to that, and I'll get into that. Prior to 1993, you could, at least for Regions 2 and Region 3, your reforestation requirement or having a stand be fully stocked it could be 10 years post-harvest. So in 1993, they moved that down to 7 years, and then added some sections on natural regeneration and regen surveys and just kind of some support information so that somebody that's maybe not an expert can have a reforestation program. 1996 added the procedures for requesting an exemption. And again, I'll get into that here in a little bit. And then in 2017, there was a reforestation review of our standards. And some of you in this room were probably a part of that Science and Tech Committee. So anytime there's a change to FRPA, the Board of Forestry convenes a Science and Tech Committee to review the literature and then come up with recommendations, and then an implementation group to actually look at those and see if they can actually execute it on the ground. So we did that in 2017. And I'll talk about some of those updates, not all of them, because that would take a while. But if you are interested, all of this stuff is on the Division of Forestry's website. All of the notes from the Science and Tech Committee and the implementation group, and then even in some of our other changes that we've made to FRPA over the years. So again, the intent of the reforestation part of FRPA is to make sure that forests stay as forest on state, municipal, and private land and trust land. And by trust, I mean mental health trust or university, not native corp or native allotments. So in Alaska, we have a constitutional requirement to manage our natural resources on a sustained yield basis. And this just does that. So the intent there is to guarantee perpetual supply of renewable resources. And then all the benefits that come with forests that are not necessarily timber related, that Alaskans have that benefit. So if you're a private landowner and you have timber and you're planning on harvesting that timber, and you impact like water or fish habitat, that's not your resource to impact. So that's the idea here, is that you're protecting other resources. So on municipal, private, and trust land, the way that we make reforestation commitments is through the detailed plan of operation. And that's the notification that you as a private landowner make to the state that you are harvesting and that you're making a commitment to reforestation. So DPOs they have a section in there that addresses reforestation. And then for state land, it's through a forest land use plan that we would specifically address what our commitment is to reforestation and how we plan on doing that. So the exemptions, like I mentioned before, so if you're converting the use of the land to something else, then you would be exempt. So if you're changing it from a forest land use to a non-forest land use, like a Walmart, although they do have some landscaping trees here. If the stand is significantly composed of, or it has significant forest health issues, then that would be eligible for an exemption, such as tomentosis, beetle infestation, a fire. Then you wouldn't necessarily need to reforest. If the treatment itself or the harvest is like commercial thinning or individual tree selection, something like that, if there's going to be sufficient trees on the site after, then there's no requirement. And then, or if the stand before harvest just had naturally had low stocking below the standard before you even harvested it, then again, you wouldn't have to. You just have to show that in your cruise data before you when you submit the DPO. So before 2017, we had the requirement was to have it fully stocked again 7 years post harvest, and there was kind of a schedule and things that you wanted to hit within that 7 years. In this, well, I guess I'll talk about that first. So normally, you would, if you're going to plant, you're going to want to plant as soon as the harvest is done. So like within the year, do the regen survey within 3 years to make sure that it's moving forward, and then within 5 to 7 years, submit that final report back to the division that you're meeting stocking standards. But in 2017, we changed some of that. So it is still 7 years, but if you can show within 5 years that you're not going to make the 7 year, that deadline, but you will make it within 12 years, it's significantly likely that you will, then you can have that additional time, that exemption to reach out to 12 years. And this was based on a couple of different things. At least in region 3 in the interior, we don't get bumper crops of like white spruce seed, but once every 11 years on average. So that's already outside of that 7 years. So if you're trying to do natural regeneration of white spruce, you could miss that time period. And then Miho's research actually showed that 88%, and I don't know if she's still here, but I think it was 88% of the stands that were harvested met stocking standards if we waited 10 to 40 years post-harvest. So if you're producing timber, that's maybe not ideal if you're pushing it out 40 years, but if you just wait a little bit longer, then that stand is going to come back. It's a pretty resilient system. So that was why the Science and Tech Committee said, well, let's extend it out to at least 12 years to give landowners some extra time. So what is adequate reforestation? And I'm speaking to a room full of foresters. So you all know this, but it's based on the size class of the trees that you're measuring. So if you're looking at seedlings, then you know what the requirements are is 450 well-distributed commercial species per acre, 450 stems. And then as it gets larger in size class, it's less and less. And that's just following kind of the dynamics of a natural stand. And if you have a variety of, you know, if you have some retained saw timber on the site, some pole timber, and then you're planting in between in the matrix, then, you know, there are in both the DPO and in the FLUP, we have a formula basically that you can put in how many stems per acre generally in the unit to make sure that you're meeting the reforestation requirements. So another requirement is to make sure that you're planting commercial species. So if you're taking white spruce or birch, then you have to replace it with something that is you know, adequately a commercial species. And in interior Alaska, it's, you know, we're talking about birch, aspen, white spruce, I guess cottonwood, but mostly birch, aspen, and white spruce are commercial species. So replacing it with those species. But the Science and Tech Committee did address, they looked at some, you know, potentially using some other species. And Keith kind of hit on this a little bit, that I was unaware that they were doing this, but, you know, lodgepole pine and Siberian larch have been shown to naturalize in interior Alaska. And this is, John Alden did a bunch of research on this. And we have provenance trials all over the state that show this. And so while I'm not aware of anybody other than maybe Concord doing anything operationally, it is something that's written into the statute or into the regulations that we could start planting this. And this was, again, the Science and Tech Committee identifying that maybe building some diversity into our forest might be beneficial given climate change. And I'm way out on an edge here, like, to speak to this. So I think that was the idea. In seed source, we have
these are the old batteries. They might start shouting. I think.
Oh, those are the only ones.
Change these out. See what happens.
So John Alden.
Can you use this? I think that only goes to the Zoomers.
Well, at least they could hear us.
Yes, that's a good idea.
I can't walk around now. I'm stuck right here. This is awkward. I can't see my screen anymore either. That's what. Yeah, sure. I'll sit there. Be flexible. All right. Online, can you hear me? We'll just assume yes.
All good.
Okay. Oh. How come on screen it's on this one it's different than that one? I'll just do this. All right, so seed source. So John Alden has developed a publication back in the day, and we have GIS layers that show our seed zones around the state. And generally speaking, you want to collect seed from an area where you're going to plant it. So if you're planting in Fairbanks, you're not going to collect seed from, you know, the upper Tanana or, you know, up in the Brooks Range or whatever. So we have that data. So the seed source has to be from generally a similar area, and the seed zones would be how we operationally do that. But the Science and Tech Committee did, you know, make a recommendation of maybe adding in some seed from a seed source 10 degrees south latitude into it, just to maybe experiment with it to see how it will behave. We haven't done that. The division hasn't done that, and we have no plans to, but you know, if anybody else wants to, that would be a great science project. So at $70 a thousand for stumpage, which is about what we get for white spruce, and then about $25 a cunit for birch. These are not big numbers. This is a low value resource compared to, stumpage in other parts of the country or down in Southeast. So natural regeneration becomes the preferred alternative pretty quickly because, when you were paying, and we're paying the same as what Keith was showing, $1.25 a seedling, it really doesn't, it's not all about economics for the state. It's about putting a forest back where a forest was, but it's hard to justify that cost. So natural regeneration is the preferred alternative. We end up usually doing some kind of a mix of natural regeneration and planting. If you are relying on natural regeneration, you want to make sure that you have the seed source within a seed rainfall distance that makes sense, that it's abundant and it's healthy, and then maybe doing a little bit of preparation to the site as well. If you're relying on vegetative reproduction, such as stump sprouts or aspen suckers, then the stand before you cut it, you want to make sure that it's of an age that is going to produce additional stems. And then, if you're relying on stump sprouts from birch, all right, is that going to be what you want as a future product? So just things to kind of think about. So even for private and municipal land, once you harvest it, the division requires a regen survey and then a report on that survey. So and this is all laid out in the Reforestation Handbook, but it has to be in a manner that's acceptable by the division. And what we normally do is fixed radius plots and just count stems and kind of get an area or an idea of the whole area. It has to be submitted within that 7-year time frame. And if you think that you're going to go out to 12 years, it needs to be submitted within 5 years. And then at the end of that 12 years, you need to have that final report showing that you've met your reforestation requirements. So we also address site prep in the regulations, and while site prep is, we're just trying to expose mineral soil. This is a pretty extreme example of that. But, if you are going to do site prep, then you want to show that you're not creating any erosion issues or, affecting water quality, fish habitat, and then minimizing the use of heavy equipment in wet soils. So you're trying to keep the site as productive as possible. So I keep talking about this, these site indicators. If you're gonna push out the reforestation past that 5-year or that 7-year time frame, like what site indicators do you have that could show that this might be successful? Or even before you cut, when you're doing the DPO or the FLUP, these are some things that you're kind of taking a look at before you even cut the stand. The thickness of the moss layer, if you are going to do site prep after at least 25% exposed mineral soil on the site. And then, if you're looking for root suckering, avoiding doing too much scarification so that you're minimizing the damage to aspen regeneration. The seed source, so you're laying out the unit. So the source of seed for reproduction, that has a lot to do with how you're laying out those units and making sure that you are, that the prevailing winds will help drop the seed into the unit. And, there's some distances for tree height. So for hardwood, typically 3 seed tree distances and 2 for spruce. And then, this is a hard one to kind of quantify, but the current or the bumper seed crop, when that last bumper seed crop was it recently or just kind of identifying when that's going to happen or when that has happened in relation to your harvest. Generally speaking, if you're going to cut spruce and it's a pure stand of spruce, you're going to plant. So like this is just too difficult to be able to pan out or to really figure out, but in some cases it works out. And then the competition, Calamagrostis is the biggest one. Keith mentioned that. What the Science and Tech Committee found in the literature was basically, if you walk into particularly birch stands, if there's any more than 5% of the stand has Calamagrostis existing in the site, like it's going to blow up as soon as you remove that canopy, and you're going to have an issue with grass. So you have to plant, you have to plant immediately or scarify or do something to address the grass issue that you're going to have. If equisedum is present prior to harvest, that's actually a positive, and I can't tell you the science behind that, but it has been shown, at least according to the Science and Tech Committee report, that horsetail has a higher, sites with horsetail have a higher percentage of natural regeneration than without. I think I have that right. Taking into consideration herbivory, of course, is huge. If it's going to be the only clearing within a huge sea of spruce, then you're probably going to have problems with moose, maybe. And then the forest health issue, and that particularly tomentosis. If it's a spruce stand that has tomentosis, you probably don't want to plant it back to spruce. You probably want it to come back to hardwood, at least in the immediate future. So if it does not look like you're going to meet those indicators, if you've got issues with competition, then you're going to want to immediately do scarification or planting. Like that's the point of this slide here, is that as soon as you realize that this isn't going to work out, natural regeneration objective is not going to work out, then you're going to want to make that commitment to scarification and possibly planting, just so that you're not going back out and doing another entry into the site and paying even more money. And I talked on this a little bit already, but again, if at some point somebody's going to do this, start planting either lodgepole pine or Siberian larch operationally, in addition to white spruce or native species, just to kind of see how that works out. Yeah. So at some point that's probably going to happen. I think, my nature is I don't want to be the first one to do this. I want somebody else to do it. And then just kind of see how this pans out. But it just makes me nervous planting non-native species, but these have been shown not to be invasive. So I don't know what my trepidation is there. Okay, so I should have added a few more slides on like what this looks like in the division right now. So like I said, in South, so most of the harvest that happens in the division is either in Southeast, or it's up in the North, or it's up in Fairbanks and Delta. Every area has some level of harvest going on, but those are the two primary areas. And in Southeast, there's not an issue with reforestation, so we don't pay a lot of attention down there as much. So it's really focused on Fairbanks and Delta. And what we're doing right now is scheduling 40,000 seedlings every other year. And we also get them for PRT, just like Keith does. They are masters at growing white spruce seedlings in a year and providing us an excellent product. We do, like I said, that schedule is, if we're going to plant a site, we're going to plant it immediately after harvest. Like as the last of the equipment is moving out of the area, we want to be in there planting. We do regen surveys 3 years after harvest to make sure that it looks like we're meeting that requirement. Right now we're doing about 100 acres a year, which is not as much as we're harvesting, but that's just a lack of staff. And as we get new staff on, which is something that the division is going through, we should be able to increase that and also focus some of this effort more on like some of the other areas like Toke, where we are also harvesting, but just not to the same level. When we do plant, we actually we have a local business that is they're called Future Forests, and Theo DeLaca is his name. And if you need somebody to plant, I would recommend him highly. They do a really good job. They're local Fairbanksans, and every once in a while he brings up some of his friends from the lower 48 to help out, but they have the ability to knock these plantings out, particularly at 40,000 seedlings a year. And I believe they're also helping Usabelli out with their planting. And then the last thing that I'll speak on is seed collection. And we store all of our seed at the Plant Material Center in Palmer. Our seed supply is dwindling, and it's getting old as well. So the germination rates are dwindling. And so currently we collect seed with in-house staff, and that's just anybody that we can get to go out there and raid squirrel caches and, get into areas where spruce have been dropped and take as much seed as possible, and then get that seed down to the plant material center where they clean it and warehouse it for us. I think there's going to be a potential to contract some of this collection out. So that's maybe the next step that we're looking at is getting a contractor to really focus on seed collection. But that's kind of where we're at right now. It's not a huge program. It's in the regulatory piece is, particularly with operations like what's going on down in Afognak, it can be the bigger piece of it. What we have going on in our own program is smaller, but still, as we grow and, as we harvest more timber, potentially, then these will be more areas where we have to meet our own requirements too. So I think probably way early. I don't know how long that was, but that's all I have. If there's any questions. It's $1.25. $1.25. Oh, 20. I wish. Of the seedlings, it's PRT. Yeah, we've been using them mostly. Although this 40,000 seedlings per year or per every other year is pretty small for them. And for a while they were telling us we can't do it anymore. But now they're still willing to work with us, but we have to do it 2 years out. And it has nothing to do with growing the seedlings 2 years. That's the amount of time they need for nursery space. Pacific Regeneration Technologies, PRT, and they're a Canadian company. Oh, they're both. For those of you online, they're Canadian and US.
Here, let me run the mic back for this one.
Hey, Jeremy, would anything stop somebody from planting Siberian larch and large pole pine broad scale now on the current statutes?
No, there absolutely could. There would be a requirement to notify us as the regulatory agency, but I think based on the BMPs and our regulations, that would be something that we are kind of encouraging, or at least allowing. Yeah, so there'd be nothing.
Yeah, Jeremy, you talked about the seed source, and it's been kind of a long time concern because it's been decreasing. A lot of the seed that we have is aging out, and the viability is dying out. So
Right.
We're kind of facing kind of a seed shortage crisis, and so I'm just kind of maybe put the state or maybe even the Forest Service on point here to see what the plans are here.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, we're from the division's perspective, I think we're looking at contracting out seed collection. But that's hard when you have bumper crops once every 11 years. So I'll be honest, y'all have to help too, right? The tribes could help with that seed collection. The federal government could help. So I think it's going to take it's not just on the state or the Forest Service to do this, although we definitely are looking towards that. So
a question I have is again with the exotic species.
yeah,
Probably I don't know if you can probably do anything under policy, I think maybe healthy, but instead of, if there was a provision where a landowner could actually plant something that's like Siberian larch, and it would be reported and would be recorded, and you would know about it. And that would be a much more proactive approach to planting non-native species, because then you can go back to 3 or 4 years later and see, oh, it's gone. And then that would be a basis for making future policy. So instead of saying, yeah, no, yes, no, but say, yes, you may, but you need to tell us about it and tell us where it is.
yeah, and that's what I mean by the notification needs to come. So if a landowner is going to do that, we need to be notified. But I would think, I mean, at this point, I think that the division's not going to say no on that. If somebody wanted to do operate, and again, it has to be a species that has shown to be naturalized and is not invasive. But if a landowner was wanting to do that operationally, yeah, we need the notification, we need to know where it is, and then let's monitor it and see what happens. Yeah. Go ahead.
This isn't a question, but it addresses the seed collection issue. Jeremy's right. We will have some quite a lot of seed collection efforts starting hopefully this fall for the next probably 2 to 3 years, both contracted and in-house. And we probably will take requests for specific seed zones if possible. So if there's areas of need, and all the seed that is currently at the Plant Material Center has been germination tested for the last 4 years. So all seed lots with 100 grams or more have been germ tested. So we do know which lots are aging out, which lots we're going to focus on, which seed zones we're going to focus on. So if you do have any requests specifically, let the Division of Forestry know.
Jeremy, who's the POC at DOF for the notification of the reforestation plan?
So it's the area forester. So whatever area you're working in, that would be the one that you're reaching out to on that DPO.
Other question?
Hi, I'm Ann Erickson from the BLM. And so I am the forestry range and botany program lead.
Mhm.
And under the botany plant conservation and restoration program, we have a really great program called the Seeds of Success program, where we are sending out people to collect seed, just not trees so much right now. But there's definitely a possibility to collaborate, particularly with this funding mechanisms that are like the bill funding and things. So, if we can show any sort of BLM benefit to seed collecting of trees, I would be happy to, talk about ways that we could partner up and things like that. So,
Yeah.
I particularly, address your specific needs and, see what we could get out of it. And I think, this idea of there being a seed shortage is not just like a forestry problem. It's like everywhere with the national seed strategy and everything. So yeah, we're trying to do our best on public lands in Alaska to help get us the seed that we need for the right area. So
As a benefit to the BLM and most of the land that burns in the interior is black spruce. So we're not going to plant those sites, but some of it's not, right? And so from a bear perspective or, that would be a benefit to the BLM, like, maybe planting in some sites that are productive. And so I think that would be the benefit to you. Like,
yeah, I'm also the bear coordinator. So it's perfect.
That's perfect.
Well, I'll be at the, what is it? The banquet or something. Yeah. Is that tomorrow? Okay, great. So just come and talk to me. I'm kind of new to this, so it's nice to meet everybody.
Yeah. Welcome.
Any other questions? Yes.
Jeremy, you said you're a bit nervous about being the first ones, the state, to
This-
plant lodgepole.
this is
This was
awesome when
done
the
in the
Army stands
nineties.
Oh, yeah.
They planted in the Fairbanks.
Yeah, not
area, they planted
operationally
cut-
though. Those are all,
They were in cutover blocks though. And there's what, 10 acres?
yeah. So it's kind of, it's Providence trial-y. There's a bunch of plantings in Bonanza and Rosie Creek down there. And then
And
there's
the
some
Copper
plantings down
Basin.
in where?
The Copper Basin, there's some on Glen Allen.
And then down in the Matsu, there's some plantings and a big lodgepole planting down in Toke. Yeah, so we have these sites and it's shown like it's not invasive. I mean, it makes sense. It
Yeah,
works.
it works. Yeah.
But are you going to plant 100 acres of lodgepole pine out on Yukon training area?
Probably not.
Right. Nobody wants to be the first one.
Well, I just point out this, the state has planted a few acres
Yeah,
and it works. So you can look at those.
it is. Yep.
Yep.
Really?
Early 2000s. Fly over Seldovia in the fall and you're like, what are all these yellow trees? It's Siberian larch and they did that because they were concerned about spruce bark beetle
Right.
and didn't want to plant Sitka spruce again. So they put in some Siberian larch. And it's not like 10 or 20 acres. There's more.
So has there been any? I don't know, is there any? I don't know, from a wildlife perspective, any wildlife folks, is there any issue with like any changes to habitat that are concerning or not really? I don't, huh?
I could speak to that, Jeremy.
Who can speak to it?
They also, this is Mitch, they planted trees, the Siberian larch under NRCS, and they also planted lodgepole pine. And the lodgepole pine failed because the moose came in and
Oh, yeah,
ate it
right.
all.
They love it.
And at the banquet, we'll talk about why the moose ate the lodgepole pine in Seldovia when there's no moose in Seldovia. That's an interesting story.
There was somebody, I think there was somebody online that said that they could speak to the wildlife thing.
This is Julie Hagelin from ADF&G. I actually have a question for you, Jeremy, but I'll first speak to the wildlife idea. I think that one thing that might be useful to consider is the idea when you do big plantings of single species that aren't normally there, the whole idea of this sort of destabilizing effect that can occur with more simplified systems. And if it's different or new, of course, the wildlife aren't going to be used to that. So I think in general would have a harder time. But in more simplified systems, you can get these more destabilizing effects, whereas in natural systems, they're dynamic. There's lots of checks and balances, and the wildlife can kind of help keep things in check. So that's the only thing that I instantly comes to mind. And there's a good paper in Nature that deals with that information. I had a question though. I was wondering if anything's known about whether the unusual genetic diversity that seems to have been highlighted in that Roberts and Hammond paper that I talked about in my talk that we have in these special glacial refugia here in the interior and also to the west, 2 glacial refugia boreal forest. It seems like those trees have greater genetic diversity than elsewhere in Alaska. And I'm wondering if anything is known, or would it be worthwhile to see if seeds from those refugia, which seem like very special places in the Western US, have more vigorous regeneration capacity or are somehow better in other ways compared to kind of the standard available seedlings that you replant with. It just seems like a special resource.
Yeah, and I would, so I was out on a ledge talking about climate change. I would be way out on a ledge talking about genetics. I mean, it's a good, when you said that in your talk, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I was not aware of that. But it would be interesting, you're right, it'd be interesting to know if there is something special about that genetic diversity as opposed to other parts of the state.
It just may be that, you know, you're wasting money by planting these other seedlings perhaps, and maybe better off using the genetically diverse ones that we have here, or perhaps those seeds are also do better in other places. But it would seem like a UAF student or, you know, someone could do a thesis type project on that.
So, I mean, John Alden was a forest geneticist, and he developed those seed zones. And I assume based on some genetic traits. So I would think that there'd be some overlap in those areas in the seed zones that he delineated. But I'm way out there, so I don't know.
Well, you did a good job. Thank you.
Thanks.
I was thinking about experimenting a little bit with, like, we just talked about like planting 100 acres or 1,000 acres with one species. What about mixing them up? So like we're integrating larch and lodgepole into a spruce and birch planted area. So like we're not taking big chances all at once. And why not start this year or next year or something so that we can start just seeing how we can, whatever we can monitor, like, yeah, we don't want to change all the species up for the wildlife, but maybe giving us some opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rather than a monoculture of. Yeah.
And from a water use perspective, having a more diverse forest basically changes up the water use dynamic such that, for example, what we're finding is that like white spruce and birch will kind of trade off the time of the day they're using water from the soil. So it can actually relieve like some drought pressure during the day. So having a more diverse stand actually changes up the water use dynamic because there is some communication below ground in terms of what's going on with the plants. So having a diverse community kind of, I think, makes them a little more system-wide drought resistant. So.
You just reminded me of the book I'm reading by Suzanne Simard of how those trees are all helping each other throughout the season too. It's such a great read, Finding the Mother Tree.
Good plug.
I don't know if my memory is that good, but we had a meeting in the Matsu, an annual meeting at the Sheep Creek Lodge, and we went for a field trip near Willow. I think it was the year after the Sockeye fire, maybe. And we looked at a stand of mixed Siberian larch and white spruce planted by DOF in the 70s. Does anybody remember that?
Yes.
And I looked at those walking into the stand. It was like a plantation plan. I don't know if it was 6 foot or 8 foot centers, but I looked at the trees. When I first looked at them, it looked like a stand of white spruce. When I got closer, I looked up because they were self-pruned about 20 feet up. I looked up and there's light green needles and dark green needles. And I looked closer and it was, those are Siberian larch. What a beautiful mix. They're doing just fine in terms of, growth. They were both about the same diameter, very healthy trees, and about almost 50 years old.
If the division starts operationally planting, is Ed Packey going to come back and yell at us?
So I got a thought, maybe question here. So we've got these John Alden plots, right? With all the different provenance trials. We've got, larch, we got pines, and then they're scattered throughout the state. And, like looking in the Matsu, right? There's a absence of, live white spruce. I wonder if there's any way that there can be a study to look at the plantation stands compared to the forest stands, like what the impacts of the wildlife are. If there's an opportunity there or something. So just a thought I had there. And then great book. The other one, Entangled Life, is another good one to look at. So.
We don't have any Canadians in the room right now, do we? Yeah, it isn't the northern extent of lodgepole just ripping up in latitude in the Yukon right now. So, I mean, I don't know if. Yeah, it's coming. So yeah, that might be a place to look. Yeah, well. It's holding the mule deer back. I don't know if it is. Any other questions?